Good afternoon, greetings wherever you are across the US or around the world. Thanks so much for joining us today. My name is Chris Adams. I look after research and insights at Miles Partnership, and it's wonderful to be back with some old friends sharing some of the latest insights from State of the American Traveler. So it's one of the leading leisure research publications, and we've collaborated with destination analysts on it for more than a decade. And we're delighted to be joined a very old friend and a very familiar face, Dave Bratton, co-founder of Destination Analyst, managing director. He's joining us from his Bay Area home. And greetings, Dave. It's great to get the old gang back together again.
Yeah, greetings, Chris. Really wonderful to be here.
Thanks. I'll pass over to Dave in a moment. And our very special guest speaker today is our own very own Ryan Thompson, Senior Vice President at Miles Partnership and founder and head of our Odyssey Content Studio. So greetings, Ryan. I know you are up at Lake Texoma, but you're back in Dallas now?
That's right, Lake Texoma on the Oklahoma-Texas border, but back in Dallas today.
Very good, and we'll be hearing from Ryan talking about some of the ways in which online video and some other rich media technologies are changing and evolving. So, of course, State of the American Traveler is really an institution of the travel industry in the US, but of course, in these unique times, Dave, Aaron, and the team of Destination Analysts have customized it and the presentation today to meet the moment in terms of the COVID-19 crisis and recovery. Just a reminder, all of the slides, the research will be available up online. We'll also be sharing them via email. There will also be, over the coming few days, the report that is typically shared. So without further ado, I'm going to be passing over to Dave, and you can see the agenda for today. We're going to be looking at the latest traveler sentiment research, and they're actually going to be sharing the COVID-19 research that destination analysts undertake every week. Then Dave's going to dive into the traveler segments, looking particular at travelers who are ready to travel right now and during COVID-19, looking at the travel planning resources travelers are using, and then we'll pass over to Ryan to talk about online video and some of the latest tips, tricks, and techniques. And so without further ado, Dave, over to you.
Thank you, Chris. All right. Get this going here. Thank you, Chris, and thank you everyone for being with us here today. I'm really excited to be back in the saddle of doing these webinars. It's been a while, and I hope everyone has been taking good care of yourselves, and maybe more importantly, taking good care of everybody around you, because these are tough times and we know it. The research that we've been doing has been trying to get a handle on all this craziness that we've been living through. And just as a little background, I think you all probably know that this is a quarterly study. We reach out every 3 months to a sample of, 2,000 American leisure travelers and talk to them about what's going on in the world. And typically in the first wave in April, we are talking to them about technology. And then the second wave, we talk about traveler segments. So in the middle of March, Chris and I and Aaron, my business partner, sat down and we were like, it just doesn't make any sense to do this during the first month of the pandemic, basically. And we were also, both of our companies had launched independently weekly tracking studies to try to understand how people were feeling. So that made no sense, but we decided to get back in the saddle right now. And so this is kind of a mix of the technology edition and the segments edition. And we're also going to bring in some of the data that I mentioned that we're collecting in our weekly surveys as well. You'll see a lot of that today. So you'll have a more immediate look at what's happening. So Chris went through the agenda, but real quickly, we're going to talk about traveler sentiment. What we're going to find is what you would expect, that we basically hit a train wreck 5 months ago, but in the last month and a half, things have kind of improved quite a bit. By no means fixed. I mean, we have a huge hill to climb, but there's some positive news here. We'll go through a segmentation exercise where we'll talk about the people who are ready to travel right now. and compare and contrast those with people who are basically not ready to travel yet. So, and that's going to be an interesting thing, I think, for you all. And then finally, we'll talk about resources that are used to plan travel. And our idea here was to basically look and see if people have changed because of the pandemic. Are they looking at other vehicles than they did 6 months ago, for example, to plan trips? What you're going to find is the answer is no, that there's a lot of solidity in that data, that people are still looking to the same resources. But we have some special questions on video, which is going to be then passed on to Ryan, who has some absolutely fantastic content for you all to give you some food for thought on how to produce videos and all. So let's talk about traveler sentiment right now. I'm going to show you a variety of questions that we asked in the State of the American Traveler and the tracking study, and hopefully paint a picture of how things are going. And the first question is, in the next 12 months, do you expect to travel more or less for leisure than you did in the most recent 12-month period? So this question's obviously trying to get at how people are feeling now compared to what they just went through in the past 12 months. So right now, only 15.3, or excuse me, in the summer wave of SATs, only 15.3% of us said they were going to travel more, and more than half, 52%, said they expected to travel less in the upcoming year. So that's kind of scary on the surface of it, but doesn't really add a lot of value unless we see how it's changed over time. So I'm going to show you a chart now which shows the last 12 or 13 years of this data. And I'd like you to look, if you wouldn't mind, at the Great Recession data on the left-hand side that I've highlighted in red. You can see the blue line shows the percent of people that expect to travel more, and the green line those that expect to travel less for leisure in the upcoming year. And at that time, this was a dramatic change. We'd never seen anything like it. Huge drop in the percent that we're going to travel more, and a huge uptick in those that have said they were going to travel less in the upcoming year. Little did we know what would happen this year. If you look over at the right, you can see on the winter wave that we were doing pretty well. We'd made a lot of progress over the last 10 years, slowly moving upward, and things look pretty good. But with the second wave, which you'll see here in the summer, you can see the huge dramatic shift. Looking at the green line, in January, 6.8% of us said we were going to travel less, 52.8 in this summer in the July wave of SATs. But if we look at the data from our weekly tracking study with a very similar sample, we see that's dropped quite a bit over the last month and a half, down to 33.4%. So we had a big shift there in a positive direction. Still nowhere near where we need to be, but it was a great shift. And let's just look at the blue line. The travel more people, that dropped from 34.9 to 15 over the first several months of the pandemic, but it's recovered some to 23%. Looking back though, compare the green point right now, the 33.4% planning to travel less. It's quite a bit higher than it was in the worst part of the Great Recession. So that's not good. If we look at the blue bar, those that expect to travel more, we see we're right about where we were at the worst point of the Great Recession. So weird story, things are getting better, it appears, in terms of how people are looking at travel, but we still have a huge hill to climb, obviously. Same story for spending. We asked this exactly similar question for whether you expect to spend more for travel on leisure in the next 12 months. And you can see, I'll show you the time series data here. A lot of wackiness over in the early part of this during the Great Recession, but nowhere near what we see now. The change from January at 9.4%, expecting a cut back on travel spending to 50.5, but now down to 34.4. Similar story on those who expect to spend more for travel over the next 12 months. So you see the picture here. Now let's move on and talk about prioritization of leisure travel in family budgets. So we ask a question about, well, how are you going to prioritize leisure travel in your family budget this year, or your personal budget? And basically fill in the blank. Leisure travel will be a blank, extremely high priority to an extremely low priority. And you can see right now, this was conducted 4 days ago, 22% of us say that leisure travel will be a high or an extremely high priority this year. What does that mean? Well, let's look at it over time. Again, this is a question we've asked in many waves of SATs, and you can see that we've dropped quite a bit from the winter to the summer wave, from 39, basically 40% to 20%. It dropped, cut in half the number of people that say they were going to prioritize travel spending highly. And then the most recent wave this week, it was at 22%. So if we look at the average here of the last two waves, you'll see that we're quite a bit below what we would normally expect here. So not good in terms of the money. Let's look at another money-related question. How much in total, in the maximum, will you spend for leisure travel in the next 12 months? Well, we see that there are two big components here. Those that want to spend more than $4,000 are expected the maximum they would, and those that would spend less than 500. In the last month and a half, both of those portions have improved. And if we look at it over time, it looks something like this. Winter 2020, I'll call out to you, at $4,180. That was the highest we've ever seen. And it's really one of the tragedies, the economic tragedies of this situation, that immediately before the coronavirus crisis hit us all, consumers were really excited about travel and spending, and it just really highlights the loss, the economic loss that we've all gone through as a result of it. 6 months later, $2,900, a huge drop in what people wanted to spend, but up this week to 32.6. So not too bad right now. We wanted to check into disposable income. How has the pandemic affected your pocketbook in terms of the amount of money you have available for leisure travel? 14.4% of us say the pandemic has actually increased the amount of money they have for travel, but 35% say it's dropped. So not a good ratio between those two right there. And finally, will you be more budget conscious or less budget conscious moving forward? And 51% of us feel that they'll be more budget conscious when it comes to taking leisure trips. So clearly we have some generation of optimism here, but the financial part of it's starting to really kick in and should be a serious concern to all of us. And before I leave you with this, I don't want people thinking that I'm telling a rosy story necessarily, because there's a big problem, and that's fear about travel right now. We ask travelers on our weekly survey, how much do you agree with the following statement? I'm planning to avoid all travel until the coronavirus situation blows over. Right now, almost 60%, 57.6% of us agree with that statement. No industry can be healthy with 2/3 of its customers opting out of purchasing, obviously. And we can see over time, it's improved a bit, but we still have a ways to go on that. Similar question of agreeance with, I'm not traveling until there's a vaccine. We see that 40.7% of us now agree with that, and that's actually not been heading in the right direction, as you can see on the right. So just in short, a brief summary, the key takeaways here. And I'm so sorry about my shooting through these slides. I'm having a little trouble controlling it. The enormous declines in traveler enthusiasm that the pandemic created have moderated in recent months to a point of reversal for some of them. Leisure travel as a budget priority remains depressed, with 35% of travelers reporting their incomes have dropped as a result of the pandemic. And moving forward, most travelers expect to be more budget conscious than they were before the pandemic. Right now, we see, interestingly, about 1/3 of travelers saying that they'd be interested in being moved by discounts and all. So something to think about. So let's move on to the next segment, the traveler segment. So what I want to do here is very quickly talk about those that are willing to travel now, that are into it, and those that aren't. So we ask a question: when it comes to getting back out and traveling again, which best describes your current state of mind? Right now, about 1 in 4 American travelers say they're already traveling or they're ready with no hesitations. So that sounds okay. And we have some people that are willing to travel, and I'm going to compare those to the people in the bottom 2 bars, those that need more time or need a lot more time before they'll be ready to travel, the 45% down there. So let's just look at how they differ, and hopefully this story will give you at least a high level perspective on who's out there ready to travel. First of all, they're much more likely to be male than female. And this is no surprise. I'll tell you, having done 1 million surveys over the course of my life, anytime you ask about confidence in something, you know, men are they're gonna say they're more confident than women about things, and this doesn't surprise me at all. They tend to be younger, 47 to 51 on average, but the proportion that are baby boomers, I think, really illustrates that importantly, 40% basically of those not ready to travel are baby boomers. Only 27% of those ready to travel are. They travel more, 5.5 leisure trips compared to 3.9 per year. And interestingly, and not unusual for a younger male skewed audience, they're more likely to travel for sporting events and special events and festivals. You can see the data there, considerably more likely to have done that in the past year. They're more optimistic about travel in the future, 3.1 and 29% for those two statistics we talked about a while earlier. Now, these are very similar to what we'd expect in normal times for the traveling public in general, but then compare it to those not ready to travel. Much weaker performance there. Travel is a higher budget priority for them, and they have higher, you know, annual maximum travel budgets. Interestingly, they're more likely to travel with family. 42.3% said they traveled in the past year with their own kids, compared to 30 for the other group, and 32% have taken a multi-gen trip in the past year. No surprise given the type of travel we've seen in the marketplace this year, but they're more interested in, or more typically more likely to visit national parks and state and local parks, as well as using social media to plan their travel. So there's a bit of a perspective on who's out there ready to travel, but I just want to tell you, we've been struggling with this question with our weekly survey for 25 weeks now. And we've kind of come to the conclusion that there are basically two kinds of people out there. One are people that are afraid to travel, are concerned about safety and the like, and they're just not doing it. And then there's another half that doesn't feel that, and they're, for whatever reason, they're willing to get out and do it. And they're not that hugely different in a lot of ways. And one of the ways that they're not is in their psychographics. And in our summer wave, we usually conduct what we call our psychographic intensity index, where we look at all these categories here. We set up a series of questions where we can measure a person's interest in things like cuisine while they travel, or authentic travel experiences, or outdoors and nature. And then every respondent is given a score from 1 to 100, 100 being somebody who's really into it, 1, not at all. So when we look at this data, you can see these different categories I just talked about, and the average score for those ready to travel in green and those not ready to travel in blue. And what's really striking is how similar they are. When we use this tool to look at different segments, we usually find some big differences between them. But right now, in terms of those that are willing to travel or interested or are traveling, and those that aren't, there are not a lot of huge differences. We see, for example, the only ones that are statistically meaningful at all, activity seeking is a little higher amongst those that are ready to travel now, but cuisine interest a little lower, as is interest in exploration, that is going to new places, having new experiences they haven't had before, a little lower amongst those that are ready to travel right now. But you know, a lot of times we think when we look at data like this, the big differences are what's interesting. To me, what's interesting here is how similar they are. And going back to what I said earlier about people's fear of travel, I think it's illustrated that. Okay, so our key takeaways: about 1 in 4 of leisure travelers feel they're ready to get out on the road right now with no hesitation. More than half feel they need more time though. Travelers are currently ready to travel, skewing male and younger. They take considerably more trips and more with events. They're more prone to take park-related trips and are heavy social media users in travel planning. And psychographically speaking, those ready to travel are more into active vacations, less into cuisine and exploration. However, the differences aren't that big. So, okay, so let's move on, and I'll end this presentation with a talk about resource usage. And when we started this, as I said, we were really interested to see if people had shifted around in the types of resources they used to plan travel as a result of this crazy world we're living in. And what you're going to see here, first of all, we ask about use of destination marketing organizations' visitor guides. And we can see that right now, about 16% of travelers say they used them in the past year. But if we look at that over time, you can see it hasn't changed a great deal. One of the interesting things about this piece of data is it tends to be seasonal. It is in the winter months or fall, more people say they've used a DMO guide than in the summer months. And I don't know if that's a matter of recall or what, but it's kind of an interesting little finding. But if we look at the average of 22%, we can see we're kind of skirting around it over the last few years, but nothing to suggest a dramatic change there. DMO websites, 35.5% of us say we've used one in the past year, and looking at it over time, we've had a bit of an uptick over the last several waves of this research, up to 35.5%. So no real change there in terms of how people are engaging with DMOs. Let's talk about three other big categories of travel planning resources. The first, social media. We ask about whether you used a variety of different social media from Facebook to TikTok. And right now we can see about half of travelers say they have used a social media tool in the past year. Now, not a lot of change here though. Nothing to suggest anything dramatic. Same thing with user-generated content. And exactly the same with any printed resource. We ask about a variety of different printed resources. So we don't see any indication that people are flipping the script in terms of how they're looking for travel info right now in these regards. So what are they interested? How should DMOs talk to them? Well, we asked this question this week in our tracking study. Please think about how travel destinations could best reach you with their messages right now. Where would you be generally most receptive to learning about new destinations to visit? And we see number 1, 2, and 3 are kind of what you consider old school at this point almost. Websites found via search engines, email, and Facebook, by far the top 3, indicating to me that we definitely need to spend a lot of time still worrying about SEO, worrying about the content on our website and making it really resonates with your travelers and is seamlessly connected to your ad campaigns. Email too, maybe sounds old, but 1 in 3 of us say that's one of the ways that they would be most receptive to hearing about what you have to offer. In Facebook, with nearly 1 in 4 of us, pretty significant connection there with travelers. And down at the bottom, TikTok at 5.8%, and digital influencers last at 4.6%. We define digital influencers, you can see it here, as online personalities with large followings. So anyway, the data you're looking at now shows the single best channel that travelers would like DMOs or destinations to reach out to them. Number 1, email, followed by websites found via search engine, Facebook. So same story here. Okay. Now, let's move on and talk about video. We know that about 14% of travelers are using video to plan their trips right now, and it's been growing, and obviously it's the future. So we looked at 2 things. We looked at real-time video, and we looked at virtual tours and asked a series of questions about them to see what kind of penetration they have, and mostly how interested people would be in using them to get destination content. So let's look at real-time video first. Have you heard of it? About 42% say they have. And this has actually been in decline. I don't know if you guys remember, in 2017, I believe, Facebook changed its product to be heavily video focused in many ways. And we've had a big jump at that point, but it's decreased a little bit in terms of awareness of it as a way of gathering content. And about 14.1% of us say that they have used real-time video to plan their leisure travel in the past. So some penetration there. And those that were aware of real-time video, we asked this question: have you used real-time video more during 2020, including the period impacted by COVID, when compared to the use of real-time video in 2019? And we can see that 54.8% of us say that we've used it more. Those that were aware of it at least, used it more. And I don't think that's anything but intuitive, given how video focused we've become with all our Zoom videos and the like in the last year. But and then the meat of the question, in general, how interested would you be in using real-time video to research leisure destinations you're considering visiting. Right now, 33.7%. 1 out of 3 of us said they would be interested or very interested in using it to plan. Down a little bit in terms of interest from what we've seen in the past, but definitely this 33% that are interested, or 34%, is considerably higher than the actual penetration in the market right now. So we definitely see some potential there. Looking at virtual tours, we ask a series of questions about that. Have you heard of virtual tours, including 360-degree tours and virtual reality tours, before taking the survey? And half of us have. Same questions as before. Have you used virtual tours to help plan any leisure travel? Right now, 27.3% of travelers say they have. So more than 1 in 4 have done a virtual tour or 360-degree tour to gather information about a destination. And similarly to what we saw with real-time video, the percent that are substantially more, slightly more likely to have used it is quite high this year compared to before, 41.4%. And then finally, interest in virtual tours. In general, how interested would you be in using them to research destination content? And we see that 45.1% say they would be. So clearly shows some great potential for this to be used as another, quiver in the, or arrow in the quiver of the DMO. And quickly, as takeaways for this section, DMO visitor guides and websites continue to be a resource used by a significant portion of the traveling public. Overall, travel planning resources used by travelers appear to have not been significantly altered by the pandemic, and travelers report that websites, SEO, email, Facebook would be the marketing channels they'd be most receptive to receiving content from. Most travelers are aware of real-time video, but only about 14% use it. But interest in the technology is high, as it is with virtual tours, where 1 in 4 people have used it, but 45% express an interest. So that is all my data for today. Thank you guys for your time. I'm going to pass it over to Chris now.
Yes, and I'll Ryan in a moment. Dave, just before you slip away, and you'll be back for the Q&A, we've just got a couple of quick questions. So you were asking about the most preferred media for consumers to connect with DMO. Did you just look at digital channels, or Sandra's asking you look at traditional media as well?
What we asked there is what we asked. Although I love that idea, and maybe this week we'll ask about printed resources and the like as well.
Yeah, and then just one other quick question. Nandy's asking, in terms of the travel sentiment and the outlook, have you ever over the years gone back and seen what people have done, actually, what trips they actually did, what their behavior was relative to what their expectations were previously?
Yeah, we do, and it's not possible to really create a link between the two, but I think everyone knows that sentiment now, when you see shifts in it, it's what leads us to behavior later, and that's why data like this is typically or commonly used in economic forecasting models and the like, because we know that if people are starting to feel better about a certain behavior, they're more likely to do it than if not. So it's not a forecast, but it's like sticking a thermometer in somebody's mouth and seeing how they're feeling in the moment. So
yeah, and I'd make the point that the uncertainty around the trajectory of the crisis and the pandemic means that expectations today might completely change tomorrow, depending on
completely turned on their head. Yeah, so I'm not presenting this as a forecast, just so everybody knows. It's a measurement in time right now of how people are feeling.
Okay, so Dave, thanks very much for that. All the slides, the research report will be shared after the webinar. And with that, let me pass over to Ryan. Ryan looks after our Odyssey Content Studio, and he's going to be sharing the sort of evolution, if not the revolution, in terms of how we're capturing and sharing online video. So Ryan, over to you, mate.
Great. Thanks, Dave, and thanks, Chris. Happy to talk to you guys today from our home here in Dallas for our content studio. So I want to talk to you about a couple of things. obviously video has a large role during COVID and the opportunity for inspiration. So I wanted to show you some of the things that we're doing here at Miles and in our content studio, but I also wanted to show you a little more of how we're doing it. As Chris talked about, Odyssey is our content studio inside of Miles, about 22 people spread around the country, primarily in Florida and Texas. We're doing everything from branded entertainment to how those videos get distributed and amplified, as well as content platforms, be it website, mobile, OTT channels like Roku, and beyond. And so let me tell you how we began to approach COVID once we sort of saw what was coming in March. And to summarize, Dave talked about that there was apparent pent-up demand, and that's something we expected would happen, and it obviously still exists today. But I think some of the other things that we were inspired by from the research that we do with our partners at Destination Analyst is the high degree of continued interest in exploration hungry, to pull it from the slide, that active lifestyle, what will I do when I travel, those kinds of things. We found it really interesting that DMO content was on the rise, especially video during this time. And so, we've always said that we want to see people like me in the video. I need to see people like me and my family traveling, and that will show me the things that I can do. I think that's still true, but now I want to see it done safely. And so obviously video is the best way to do it. I mean, from the standpoint of we can tell them it's safe to travel here, or we can show them. And so doing so through video is really powerful. So if we can advance to the next slide, the challenges that we faced, obviously consumers would continue to be inspired, and we knew travel would be different. But in March, we thought that filming new productions would be restricted for at least 4 to 8 weeks. We were wrong, it was longer. And at the same time, destinations questioned the right message at a time when their stakeholders and attractions were closed. Budgets are limiting, resources are limited, our stakeholders and attractions are closed. Should we even market? And if we did, what would we be showing? There continues to be a very large discussion around representation of COVID. I mean, are we going to show masks or not in the kind of work that we do? And compound all of this with a lot of what Dave was talking about. I mean, we're living in probably the most uncertain times that I can recall from a marketing standpoint. So how do we begin to make decisions on the future? So I'll tell you a little bit about how we approach that in this next slide. So within days, we saw our network, broadcast networks, ABC, NBC, CNN, those guys really adapt quickly. And so we were seeing our anchors and our weather people broadcasting from home and doing so in fairly high quality. And so we took a cue from that and said, obviously there's a new approach to producing video using technology and innovation, and we ought to be open to exploring those different things. We very quickly focused on a drive market style road trip. We began planning these things in March and really began executing them for the market once we got through April and began to see some kind of expectation ahead with what was happening with the pandemic. We certainly doubled down on a local first mentality in some of the work. That being locals doing things safely in their city. Not only are they the experts, and not only are many travelers wanting to quote travel like a local, but if they're confident and safe in their communities, perhaps we can be too. And then we sought to represent the reality. There's two views on masks. One is to say this is a negative thing, but we look at it a little differently. For those of you who've traveled to Asian countries over the last few years, masks are very common there. It's part of reality. And so our view on masks are that when you see a video that was shot with someone wearing a mask, it tells you a couple of things. One is it's timely. It was produced fairly recently. And in fact, if you see one where people are very close and touching, you probably instantly go, well, that was obviously shot before COVID. But I think more importantly, if we represent mask in the right way, and it's not all about the mask, but if we represent it in the right way, we can show confidence to the consumer that we're doing things safely. And so it's sort of an abstract way to talk about the safety message without necessarily having to overtly state it. So let me show you 3 different examples of the things that we've done during COVID. And the first is something that we did with San Francisco Travel that was a completely new experience with us. Probably one of the most revolutionary things we saw during the COVID time period was how the NFL draft produced the draft on television. Coaches in their basements, players in their living rooms, all connected together, very professional style switching and pretty well executed minus a few different hiccups. And so taking that idea of remote production and having started to focus on it since March, we employed much of the same technology to produce remotely for San Francisco. And so San Francisco wanted to continue to get the word out. They wanted to continue their diversity and inclusion message that they're so well known for. And so we shot video remotely with 2 end goals. We shot footage that had 2 versions. Our gate is open and welcome you back soon messaging. And so the idea being that we couldn't predict when city and state officials would necessarily reopen the city, but we could be ready for it if we thought and planned well for the content and shot it in the correct way. We then remotely produced a number of spots with either local or national celebrities, from head coaches of major teams to Francis Ford Coppola, the director, and did so all remotely. So what would normally be a 5 to 7 person shoot, a crewed shoot that we would send to these locations, we sent a single local camera operator with a kit that included a remote conferencing solution that would give them not only the ability to talk to our producers back in Florida, but actually get the return so they would see what was happening as things were being filmed and received. That local person didn't have to travel. They were a local to San Francisco, and so they were our eyes on the ground. And then with that, all the B-roll footage was existing or supplied. So let's click to the next slide and we'll let a quick video play, and I'll tell you behind the scenes how this was done.
The city supports their sports teams so tremendously. Getting the opportunity to play for the San Francisco Giants has been an incredible honor and an incredible gift.
San Francisco is just an inspiration in and of itself. The energy there, the people, the architecture, just so absolutely breathtaking.
San Francisco is bursting with things that people love to do.
I love coaching in San Francisco because I think it's the most beautiful city in the country. There's this beautiful love for basketball that exists, just electric.
I get my inspiration from being around folks all over the city.
The physical beauty is really special.
I find inspiration in the people.
San Francisco is just a special place.
San Francisco has always been associated with the joy of life.
So as we dive back into the presentation, let me show you behind the scenes of how this was done. So you're seeing the shot with Hunter Pence and Lexi, and as well as Francis Ford Coppola. And so you see some very light equipment. We have a lighting setup, we have microphone, we have a couple of cameras that are mounted. But in this case, the technology solution we were using to interact with the talent was Zoom. And so this doesn't have to be an expensive proposition. There are some more advanced technologies we're using to ensure that we're receiving 4K quality, over the internet, if you will. But in this case, it was relatively simple. Our producer was back in Florida, who was interacting with them, prompting them for questions and asking those questions, and ultimately stitching together these recent interviews that occurred during COVID with existing footage and editing it and having a plan is how we produced the content. So moving on, I want to talk about a different approach we took with Chattanooga, Tennessee. And so something some of you may have heard me talk about in the past is UDC. That is not a misnomer. It is UGC with direction applied to it. And so said another way, UGC is great. I mean, empowering our consumers to produce content is a wonderful thing, but so often it's a wild card. You don't know whether you're going to get something great or something that could be inappropriate to air. And so user-directed content, or UDC, is employing technology that allows us to give consumers the ability to capture footage on their iPhones, but do so in a way that sort of gives them a framework. We can send them instructions to their phones. We can tell them about lighting and the orientation of their phone and shots to capture. And so it gives us the ability to provide some direction. And so with this, Chattanooga wanted to show the city during COVID in a safe and responsible way as it was moving through different phases of recovery. So together with the tourism office, we concepted the We Love Chattanooga campaign. We deployed locals here again as the opportunity to show locals that are in their businesses or on the streets that are doing things in a safe and responsible way. And we did all of this with their iPhone. And so as the content comes in from the iPhone, it was all received in our cloud by our producers in real time, where we could give them feedback and capture new and different shots. So I'll show you a little bit more about how we do that. Let's play this video first. And remember, as we're doing that, everything you see here was captured on iPhones that were already in possession of the user.
We really try to emphasize craft cocktails and quality of beverages.
And we make sure that we are on the same page as far as how we steam our milk to how we dilute with the right kind of ice for our cocktail. We buy quality coffee. We buy certain graded coffee. We roast it a certain way. Same thing with our cocktails and our alcoholic beverages. Our wells are high quality spirits. We work with some amazing distilleries around the U.S.
We designed a unique environment that invites people in.
What we're trying to do is cultivate a space where people in Chattanooga could experience a culture holistically through music, food, drink, without having to leave their hometown. We're just trying to do everything we can on a daily basis to adjust, keep people employed, take care of the staff that are still technically with us. Here we are, we're doing this together. Let's keep doing it together and keep trying to take it to the next level.
So, I mean, a great example of something we can all relate to, right? All of our communities are going through this in different ways. And so they had their iPhones. We were able to send them producing instructions. But as you see here with the technology, we're able to send something in real time that says, hey, Travis P., those last shots were great. Get a few more of the crowd. And so, and we use a product called Cinebody to produce remotely when we're doing things with iPhones. And so, really powerful product, a really effective use of marketing dollars too, which is something else that's important during these times, and something we were able to do get off the ground in a matter of days during the pandemic. Excuse me. So let's show you one more thing. Want to talk about a 4-phased COVID recovery campaign approach that we've taken with Louisiana tourism. And so very early in the process, our team working with Louisiana created 4 distinct phases that would sync up with what was happening in the community. And so the first phase was something that we sort of referred to as, a break from the bad, meaning that in social media, especially, it was all very negative messaging. We were all very uncertain. There was a lot of fear, and there wasn't a lot to be optimistic about. And so phase 1, as you'll see in a couple of examples, was a very different kind of video. It was all natural outdoor locations. There was no music. There was no voiceover. There were no people. It was simply natural sound only. And then it was meant to be a retreat from what you were experiencing. And it featured some of Louisiana's lesser populated, lesser known places where you could do things safely at a distance from other people. As the city and the state continued its recovery, phase 2 was still outdoors focused, but now we begin to show people, up to 1 or 2 people together. We started to incorporate music with natural sound, and I'm going to show you an example of that too. And we're currently in phase 3 and about to be in phase 4. And so those aren't live yet, but I can tell you that phase 3 will be more of that local restaurant focus. It's currently delayed in its deployment due to Hurricane Laura. And then phase 4 will be much more active from the opportunity from moving down the road trips theme probably launching next month. So let's take a look at these real quick, and I'll show you phase 1 first and then phase 2. So as we load up number 2, I mean, again, Serenity, and something that's important to notice here and to note is all existing footage. And so we talked about remote production. We talked about using our users or our locals' iPhones and guiding them. And then in this case, it was all footage that had already been captured over the past, and something that we could easily utilize and recut into something new. So let's take a look at phase 2, which is moving a little bit more to having people with a little bit more direct tourism message. Okay, so that's Louisiana, and again, that is an approach to using existing assets. We're really proud of the initial, even just phase 1 approach with some very powerful organic and paid media. I think, as Dave was saying earlier, the use of DMO content, especially via the website and via social media, but especially even organic social, has been really powerful. Here are some of the results we saw just from using a small paid media budget as well as an organic approach just in a handful of weeks. So let's talk about that mask message again. And I want to show you something that you probably have seen, at least if you're in the Midwest, you're going to see it. But you know, again, taking the cue from large national brands is something that I think we all can often do in terms of how to do things well. And so I think this is a very effective commercial that's airing right now from AT&T on how to use masks. So let us play it real quick, and then I'll mention a couple of things about it. Looks like this one doesn't have audio, which gives me more chance to talk. But if you've seen the ad.
But is it reliable?
And secure.
You should consider making a big deal about it.
Bigger?
I said bigger.
Oh, bigger deal, bigger than what I'm doing?
It's not complicated. A 5G network needs a 5G device. Now everyone, including existing customers, can get a free Samsung Galaxy Note 20 after trade-in.
So a pretty simple and effective commercial, in my opinion. In the store, AT&T is rolling out a new campaign that outside of the store, across the glass, is a consumer wearing a mask who happens to walk by and sort of yell a message across over the glass, over his mask, and just ask a question. And so I think, again, when I saw this, it told me a couple of things. One, this is a timely and current commercial. Two is the store looks safe, and clearly if that person's coming in, they're wearing a mask, and so AT&T must be doing something right. But I think it's a representation of the times. And so there's not a universal answer for the mask topic, but I would say that I think, in our opinion, they're probably with us for a while. And again, from our Asian countries and from an Eastern perspective, it's certainly something that we've seen for many years. And so I wouldn't delay campaigns because you're questioning whether we should wear a mask or not. I think it's something that's probably part of our life for a while, and something that we're going to be dealing with and will be considered normal. So a few key takeaways for you, and then we'll pass it back to Chris and open some Q&A for our last 10 minutes or so. There's a bit of guidance that we would give you that I think we've been embracing during these times. The first is to be willing to change. I mean, I think that's obvious, but it required to really think outside of the box, and it required to sort of break some old rules. Filming with iPhones and using Zoom and advertising is something we probably never would have considered. But it was sort of evolving with the times. Combined with that is agility. If we wanted to get back out in the market and respond with our clients to their customers, we had to do so fairly quickly, and we frankly had to abandon some other things that we were planning to do. Part of the math discussion, I think safety and tone is very important in the messaging. A lot of the work we're doing right now is not necessarily the pure inspiration, but is more factual in nature. Is it safe? What are we doing? What can I do on location? Which matches that exploration hungry approach we saw in the research earlier. I think that this environment has also allowed us to experiment more, and to experiment means also to sometimes fail. And so, like network television, don't be afraid to sort of actively try different things. And if it doesn't work, show your personality. You're seeing that with children and dogs and strange things happening on TV, and I think that's something that makes the experience more personal for the viewer. And lastly, don't forget about those assets. You or your agency probably have them stored somewhere. Too often, these kinds of assets get shot and stored away, and many times you've got evergreen footage that you can use for so many different things if you just look at it with a different lens. And so with that, we'll hand it back to Chris and see what we have in the form of Q&A.
Thanks a lot, Ryan. And I'll ask Dave to join us in a moment. Just a couple of quick updates. A reminder, all this research will be available on the web address as you see there, shared out via email. I also want to share with you the Funding Futures project. Quite a number of you on an incredibly popular webinar we ran with US Travel about 10 days ago. We had over 1,300 DMOs register. This is the largest ever study we're aware of looking at the options and opportunities for tourism and DMO funding. So there was a number of major component parts. We worked with destination analysts on the research part, Civitas, tourism economics, and we were fortunate to get support from both US Travel and the Destination Marketing Association of Canada. So all of those research reports are available at that web address right there. Plus you can sign up for a couple of the upcoming webinars. We'll be running a series. You can see we're running a Canadian DMO edition on the 17th, and we're going to be looking at reserves and short-term rentals on the 22nd. So an absolutely pressing issue, lots of fantastic research and resources and recommendations there. Just a final couple of resources to share with you. And in fact, this ties into what we were just discussing, video analysis. So a great blog about how to optimize your YouTube videos to maximize organic reach. And we did an analysis of 186 DMOs around the world and identified the top performing videos and the characteristics of those videos. We also did a special COVID-19 edition, all available in a continuation of our Moving Picture Magic series that we've done now over the last several years. There's also a major study that we were fortunate enough to work on for the New Zealand government, looking at best practices in domestic tourism from around the world. We identified 5 international best practices. We looked at 8 countries in depth. A lot of fantastic resources available right there. Okay, let's move to Q&A. So Debbie is asking about the mask question, and I know I've got a couple of comments, but Dave, what are you seeing in the research you're doing around travelers' propensity, interest, engagement, issue of, wearing masks when traveling?
Yeah, clearly way more people want masks to be worn than don't. It's really sad and unfortunate that we've become so divided that this is even becoming an issue, but there are people that don't want to wear masks and won't wear masks. But what was it in your research, an 8-to-1 metric, something like that, Chris, and
Yeah.
those that want it. So I think you'd be turning off a bigger chunk than you'd turn on by avoiding the issue, you know. And if anything, right now we need to be creative. If any point in at least my life, being creative and trying new things is probably more important now than ever. So I would not be afraid of it.
Yes, almost 2/3 of American travelers from the research that we've helped commission indicated they were either would only consider destinations where there's mask wearing, or are more likely to, and that's 8-to-1 over those who were turned off by it. So it's really a safety issue, and we're also seeing a lot of research, and I bet you're seeing this, Dave, around the issue of confusion.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
People don't know what the standards are, what the rules are, what the regulations are, and that uncertainty and confusion is basically causing people not to travel.
Yeah, and to the degree that a DMO can address that, I think it should be a top priority. To some degree, what can you do? Because there's so much going on out there that can't be controlled. But we found one of the interesting things we've seen in our research is that a big proportion of people will actually hold a grudge. So if I get on your airplane and it's not managed right, or I get to your destination and I'm scared because people are acting in a way that I don't feel like they're taking care of my safety, I'm likely to say, okay, well, to heck with them. I'm going to go use their competition. So I think it's something of tremendous importance that we all make sure people feel safe where they're at, whether we're a business or a destination, you know. So for what that's worth.
I think, clarity in terms of communication, clarity in terms of health and safety guidelines, and getting consistency across your destination with operating businesses so everybody's on the same page. I've got blogs on exactly that subject. Ryan, we've got a question from Kim. You mentioned a technology, Cinebody. She was just asking a little bit more about what that is.
Yeah, absolutely. So Cinebody is a technology that allows you to remotely produce using the consumer's iPhone. It's something that Miles exclusively represents in the tourism industry, and so I mean you can feel free to reach out to any of the folks at Miles and talk about it. But it's something that is deployed as an app on your phone. It overlays your existing camera, meaning that you're not really learning to use something new. You're filming as you would with your camera. But then our producers can use a project management screen and send requests for additional shots. They can see the footage coming in and stored in the cloud. But we then take it through a normal post-production process. And so one of the reasons those videos look so polished is because they were still post-produced by an editor, but all of the filming and shooting, which is the majority of the cost of a project like that, was all done by the locals. And so it's CINEBODY, and feel free to reach out and we'll be happy to talk to you.
Very good. One last question for you, Ryan, from Rebecca. So the San Francisco video, she was asking what was that shot on? Was that shot on iPhones? I think we saw other professional equipment there. Did you ship the equipment there?
Yeah, so it was shot on DSLR cameras, and so those are we would call those prosumer cameras. They are something you can get at your Best Buy. What we do for any shoot is we put out specifications for how things should be shot, and so we're going to talk about color and lighting. We're going to talk about 4K or 1080p, and so when we issue those specifications, our local shooters can select the right equipment that they need. In this case, it was fairly simple equipment. It was equipment they already had. And so using our network or using the network that San Francisco Travel had, we were able to find local shooters. And we didn't necessarily care about the camera equipment as long as they met the specifications. And they did so. And obviously the end product looks like it was all consistently shot.
Very good. And I think, even post the crisis, we're going to see, as we are in many other parts of travel and business, new and interesting opportunities to save costs and do things in a more efficient way. So let's wrap it up there. Dave, very Many thanks to the whole team at Destination Analysts for all the work that I know went into the research. We'll be connecting again with Dave and Aaron in the final quarter. And a reminder, they put out an extraordinary weekly traveler sentiment update on how Americans are feeling right now. So visit destinationanalysts.com for more information on that. And Ryan, thanks so much to you and the whole team at Odyssey and Miles for sharing those insights. And to our audience today, stay safe, stay well, and we look forward to connecting with you soon.